Hi, welcome back. This is Susan Regan, and I wanted to just let you know that I have followed back with two of my podcast guests, Holly Forman-Patel and Summer Howard, because there has been this ongoing question in my groups, which is, why can't I heal? Why is this taking so long? Why do I still have all of these triggers and traumas and reactions to my ex? And why aren't I moving on? So I thought they could come in with more words of wisdom and see if we can get some of this question answered and some strategies to moving forward. I hope you enjoy their responses. Hi there, Holly. It's so good to have you back talking to you. This is Holly Forman-Patel. She's one of my regular contributors to my practice and also to the work that I'm doing to try to pass on information to clients who are trying to get information about how to heal. And so we were talking offline a while back about the whole concept of trauma and healing and getting stuck. And I find that in a lot of my divorce groups that people really get stuck in feeling so mad at themselves that they're not getting healed, they're not healing themselves, they're not able to move forward. So I just wanted to start a conversation with you to see if we could give them some insight about why that might be happening and what they might be able to do to help themselves. And just like, I always feel like it's great to label things so people understand what their psychological mind is doing during times of hardship.
No, it's a great question because we often beat ourselves up over it, right? Like, why can't I just get past it? And oftentimes we actually hear people in our own lives say stuff like that. That happened 2 years ago. You have to just get over it. Just go kiss someone else, right? Like all these well-meaning statements that people in our lives say that aren't actually helpful. And that's because a lot of people don't realize that divorce and the many associated memories with that or separation is actually a type of trauma. And it's not actually a one-time trauma, like, right, that time I got into a car accident on Fifth Street in Berkeley. But it's a series of traumatic memories that have happened to us. And oftentimes during this time, we're in these high levels of distress. And when something not great happens to us and we're in high levels of distress, there's a good chance that that experience is actually going to be what we call maladaptively stored and processed in our brain, as opposed to when healthy things happen to us, that's adaptively processed. And so because we're going through these traumas, right, these multiple ones, it gets stuck in our brain and body.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we have related experiences, so that's why when our ex texts us about maybe the transition with our kiddos, and we have this huge response, and it's because our brain and body is taking in this experience the same way we took in maybe that memory when my ex asked me for a divorce. And a good analogy when a trauma is maladaptively stored is that our fire alarm in our house keeps going off, even though there's no fire anymore. And so when people are having these experiences, it means that usually how they can get past it is going to therapy and getting some support to adaptively process what happened to them. And then even more than that is that if we've had earlier experiences related to other relationships, and if we walk this back to any other traumas we've had in our life, especially if they're interpersonal, that's going to make all of the things with a divorce or separation even more intense. Because
Mm-hmm.
not only do we have these recent memories, but we have to go back and heal our older trauma as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like these concepts a lot because I think about the whole concept of deregulation and the whole idea about there is a fire alarm, and that when people are going through a divorce or separation, they also are feeling like they're in survival mode, like they are in danger, and
Yeah.
they really have to think about how they're going to survive. So there's a deregulation in it. So it's really hard to like get into a healthy state enough to think about how are you going to just take care of yourself on the day to day or function or make big decisions.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this too before our conversation, just to think about the role of the person who is in our life that might be trying to give us sort of positive affirmations, like you can get out of this, you're going to meet someone else, it's not going to be so bad. actually that makes the person who's saying it feel better, but it really doesn't make the person who's receiving the information feel better. They still feel
Absolutely.
like they're behind. And in a
Yes.
way, like one of the things that I try to do in my groups, and I'm sure that you try to do this too, is I just try to hold space for the person that's in that state. And I try to actually just pay attention to the regulation piece in the room, like how they're
Yeah.
regulating themselves. If they're able to think clearly
Yeah.
where they are in their own emotional state of mind, so that we can have some kind of connection during that time. Like that feels
Right.
like the most healing thing at that moment.
Yeah. In the moment when that dysregulation is happening.
Right.
But if we're finding ourselves chronically dysregulated, it's going to be really important to get support outside. And that can be hard, right? But going to therapy, and Susan, I know you know I do EMDR therapy, and I'm a huge proponent of that. That can really get at these traumatic memories. And so when I find people are looping, like regular talk therapy isn't doing it, I highly recommend doing something like EMDR therapy.
Right. So it's going to therapy, but then it's also noting in yourself, like, I'm still in the same place. I'm still not getting through this thing. I'm still having this repetitive pattern of thinking
Yes,
that doesn't stop. Right. And then to do a
absolutely.
little bit, maybe more body oriented therapies and
Yes.
somatic oriented therapies.
Yep. Because if we could think ourselves out of it, no one would have to come and see you or me, Susan.
Right.
And I would actually love that world. That'd be great.
Right.
But it's not the world we live in, unfortunately. And I say it's not a thinking problem, it's a body one. And we have to heal what's happening in the body somatically.
Mm-hmm. So if you can give some tips about, like, if people are finding themselves, like, the practice of, being in therapy, doing EMDR, doing somatic experiencing therapy to heal what's in the body, the traumas that have happened that are being mimicked by this next loss, right?
Yeah.
If we can think about, like, how do we help our clients think about when they're not regulated? Like, some people don't even know when they're not regulated,
Yeah.
and how to get themselves to be more self-regulated. I don't know if people even need to maybe have more of a definition of what that means.
I think the hardest thing is being aware of it.
Mhm.
And so first noticing, am I getting feedback from other people that maybe I'm not as regulated as I think I am? Or am I having a lot of situations where I'm feeling guilty or anxious after an interaction? There's a good chance that I might have been dysregulated. And so
Mhm.
it's first being aware that it's happening. And then second is going to be catching yourself after it happens. And the third is maybe actually starting to catch yourself right before it happens or during it.
Right.
So there's these different level of skills that we can do. Um,
So talk
and
about
the
it, catching it right before. I mean, I love that thought of, like,
Yeah,
if you're ruminating, if you're feeling bad about your interaction, you probably weren't really present at that moment.
yeah,
And you're so I should have said this, that didn't go well. Why did I start
yeah,
talking about that? That kind of stuff, that regret thinking.
yeah.
But and then to be like, am I in the present? Am I breathing? Do I feel my feet on the floor while I'm in that interaction? But how about the right before?
Yeah. So it's to see, okay, I had the interaction. What was happening before? What are the signals my body was sending me
Mhm.
that helped me see that I was getting dysregulated? Did I start flushing? Right? If I started flushing or starting getting hot in my body, I was probably starting to get activated. So if I can catch myself, that I mean, ideally we want to do something a little more preventive, even
Mhm.
earlier than that. But if I can catch myself when it's happening,
Right.
um, and this is not a very advanced thing that you have to do, and it sounds overly simplistic, but taking 5 deep breaths is truly one of the best gifts. And so,
Right.
really briefly, we have our autonomic nervous system, right? Which
Right.
is all the things that we do, like breathing, things like that. And when we get activated, we have these two other nervous systems, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And so, right now, Susan, you and I are ideally in our parasympathetic. We're
Mhm.
nice and calm and chill, there's no danger happening. But when I start getting activated, I go into my sympathetic nervous system. These two can't be on at the same time. So if my sympathetic starts getting activated, if I do something to bring myself back into my body, the other one's going to go online. And so 5 deep breaths is one of the best things to do. And for some reason in media, we see three. Three is not going to do it. You have to do at least five. And I actually practice this
Huh.
with clients. And you can tell when I practice it with someone, when we get around three, we get kind of shaky. And then if you get to at least 5, usually you can really feel that calmness in your body set in. And if you look at the work of Daniel Siegel, he talks about, he does the hand model of the brain and how this is our prefrontal cortex, this is our midbrain is here, and then our brainstem. So you and I are like this, we're nice and chill and calm. When we get activated, our lid starts to flip. And when it totally flips, our sympathetic is online, we're in our brainstem, and we're activated, we're dysregulated. And so the key in what you and I are talking about is catching it when our lid's going like this, when I start flushing, right? Doing something to help that lid stay on. And usually it's going to be something in the body, like those 5 deep breaths. Taking a walk's another one.
Right. So, and I think also like what is to really think about for yourself, like what are some of the other ones that you have? Like, I think one of the things that I notice with clients is they stop listening.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're just thinking about what they're going to say, but they're really not listening. They're really not engaged in a conversation back and forth. They just have their thing that they're going to say, and it's not interactive at all. And they're upset, right? So it's this one line thing. It's this memory. It's this repetitive pattern that they've got going on in their head.
Yeah. And figuring out how to break that pattern is the most important. And so doing those little things, like I said, the 5 breaths, which sounds super simplistic, but it's actually helpful. That's how you can start rewriting and rewiring your brain and your reactions. But the challenge is it takes time, and people want that quick fix. And I'll hear people say, I tried, it didn't work. I'll say, okay, well, could you keep trying it for a few weeks and let's see if small shifts happen.
And then there's also the challenge of actually doing it in front of somebody. So that means like really slowing down and just also maybe saying out loud, like, give me a minute, I'm starting to have like a lot of thoughts coming together. Like you can actually say very human responses and people won't, will be fine with that. I think it's also when we hide that we're starting to deregulate.
Right. Absolutely. And I find by and large, people are receptive to when we say, oh, just give me a second.
Yes. I think it's actually a powerful pause in the connection. And actually you're still holding space with the person. Right. And usually people are waiting. Like they're like, okay, So I think that is a forgivable human thing, is to like, wait a second, I'm not thinking clearly right now, or I'm doing a million things in my head, or I just texted this whole message or whatever it was. I think
take a break, go get a glass of water.
Yes.
You know what I mean? You can get a glass of water, go use the restroom, and then you can do your breaths, in the kitchen, in the other room.
Right.
But the pause,
I always hear about this a lot with transitions, like the transitions of the parents with kids back and forth, where parents really have a hard time with when they're in the car with the kids, that they get flooded with memories, of sadness, of grief, of the other person, of how life is different or whatever, or the pressures that they're starting to feel. And I think that I'm just thinking about that in terms of sometimes you are flooded in an area you cannot get out of the trigger, you're right there. So some of it might be just, again, like recognizing the pattern and doing something preventative before. Okay, so if you're going to pick up your kids and it's going to trigger you, then you're going to have to really work on like what else you can add to that moment. Like I wonder what you would suggest to clients, what to add to that moment.
Yeah, so I often like to, there's an exercise called the container exercise, where you actually create a container, and you can have a real one, or people get really creative with this, and you look at, okay, what would it look like? What's the color? What's the texture? And this is where you can actually put those things into. And so you can do it in the moment when you're activated, and actually have clients imagine like taking this memory and putting it in the container. But in an even more proactive way, if you do it before you go pick up your kids, you take even just a couple of minutes to ground yourself, take some breaths and say, okay, what do I need to have protected in this container that can be there when I go to therapy or when I have time later to journal, but I don't need to have it in the moment with my kiddos? Because in the end, it unfortunately takes away from your time with your kids, who are really only young once, right? And those are valuable times.
Right. Right. And also, I think, just because I know that that's such a guilt trip of our clients is like, your kids are only, not that you're saying, and I just think that's a guilt trip that we all have when we're parents about, like, we weren't together enough. We were anxious. They saw our triggers and reactions. And I just want to like say something about the power of repair, that I think that, kids can see you work on it. They can also see you switch, and then they can get you back in the present, the mom or the dad that they really want to be with, and that you can actually teach them this as well. So I think there's always that thought of like, where do we learn this information? And part of it is, if you want to really have a lot more peace in your life and you're trying to work on yourself, then that gets to be passed on, right? It's like breaking the generational.
Absolutely. And I recommend actually parents do the grounding in front of their kids, is what I'm saying, is that you can actually sit down and be like, oop, let's take that minute, right? And you're modeling for them that. And there's a lot of parent guilt, like you were saying. Then you know that you're doing the things within your control. And I feel like that actually combats the parent guilt, right? Like you did the exercises, you did the things that were within your control.
Exactly.
To be present with your kid. Yeah. Knowing that there's no perfection. And I think that's the hard thing, is that when we like set up this like perfect parent stereotype, we're all going to fail. There's no such thing. Right. And I was actually just at a training with Stephen Porges recently, this last weekend, and you actually don't want to be the best parent. And this was talked about because perfect parenting actually doesn't set, no, but it's really true. It doesn't set our kids up for resilience. Because we have to have things not be perfect. And that's how we learn and grow and build that resiliency. So I always tell parents I work with, when things don't go the way you planned, just think in your head, yay, my kid's going to be so resilient. That's fantastic.
Right. And they also learn how to handle lots of different situations, handle different people, figure out how to stay grounded and centered themselves. Right. So if this is part of your communication pattern, even like, so kids, give me a second, I'm putting all my material in the container that I don't want to be in our time together. Right.
Exactly. Yep. And I recommend families have a family one. And I get like very,
the family container. Great.
And you actually be like, I'll open it, be like, okay, what do you have to put in there? And you can actually, sometimes people like to draw and actually put that in the container. Some people are visual, but other people aren't, especially kids. They're more concrete. Right. You can all draw a picture of what you want in there, and then you can each put it in and shut it. It can be really lovely. Working on it yourself and modeling it for your kids.
That's a great idea. And then you can also talk about like, I am going to look at what the container is in the container on my side. You need to look at what's on your side, but we can choose when we're going to look at it.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be here all the time.
Right. When we're trying to have a family dinner, or when we're driving to school and that's our time to connect, those kinds of things. Yeah,
absolutely.
What are some of the other things that you see or want to share with us about like clients getting stuck on their healing path?
In trauma. I think just knowing that it's a very normal experience. When we're stressed and not great things happen to us, things get stuck. And I think there's a lot of guilt that comes with being stuck, that you're not trying hard enough, right? You're not good enough. And it recapitulates or reinforces these different narratives around ourselves. And so I think first and foremost, knowing that, it can happen, it can be normal, and we get to choose our path going forward to move through it. Right. And it might take some different things, because then a nail doesn't work for everyone, right? Some people need a screw, some need a peg. Like what works for one person might not necessarily work for someone else. And so just knowing that it might take some time, but that there are lots of ways to heal it. It kind of reminds me of the thought of when I notice and work with people who are leaving a long-term relationship and they're really traumatized by it. And I think that was right on what you said about the trauma isn't just from there. It's from all that reminds you of from your childhood, all the losses, all the abandonment, all the conflict, all of that kind of stuff, or not being understood. Absolutely. But it seems to me like one of the things, other than holding a space for people in therapy or EMDR or groups or whatever, wherever the healing modality is, for people to find a space to heal, it's also that people start changing their relationship with themselves around that topic. Because maybe it is about, like what you said, it's normal
you can't, beating yourself up isn't going to help. It's like, yeah, I'm accepting this is a really hard time. I'm not able to move on here. I'm not able to date. I'm not able to forgive right now. So I just have to be working with myself on where I'm at. Right.
I love that you said the word forgive, because I find, and you might find this too, that a lot of clients come to therapy and think they have to forgive someone else. Like that's like the end all. And I always say, and this is Holly's theory of things, that you don't have to forget, but we need you to move through it and not get stuck in it. And sometimes the moving through it, we forgive someone else. But what happens if we don't move through it is it's like we're tied back to that. And I see this happening with grief and loss too, right? If I'm less sad about this person who died, if I'm less sad about this relationship that died, right? There's a big parallel between it. What does that mean? And so the being able to move through it, I always say grief and loss around a relationship, right? As well as any other grief and loss, it's like we're in a cloud. And if we don't move through it, then we're just stuck in all the ickiness, the rain, the lightning. But when we move through to the other side, we're able to know, okay, that happened in the past, and we're not tied to it anymore. It's something that happened to me and is not happening anymore. And we can start rewriting that narrative for how we go forward.
Mm-hmm. I also think that forgiveness is forgiving yourself for how you're going through it. That you are a person that is going to have to feel or is feeling all your feelings, and they're not easy things it's not easy to do that.
Yep.
Right.
All feelings are okay.
Right. So forgiving yourself on how you're going through it, forgiving yourself that it happened, forgiving yourself so you're right. I mean, the forgiveness to the other person may or may not come.
Right.
It's really like identifying and understanding what you need to understand so you can move forward. Right.
Absolutely. Because there's also a lot of forgiveness that might need to happen around staying in a relationship for a certain amount of time. We give ourselves a lot of responsibility for the partner we picked. And it's like, okay, it's very easy to be where we're at now and to judge our past self. And that's what's often happening. We're judging our 22-year-old self or whoever for being where we're at now.
Right.
And it's like, well, forgiving ourselves in the now is super important. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, can you tell us a success story of when you've seen someone really move through the trauma and what you feel like were things that were unique to that experience that you either gave them or they, you just saw that really worked? And I know it's a big question. So I'm also just wanting to give the people that are listening to this like a little bit of hope around there's so many other things to do or try. And it's not so much like being fixed by somebody, but it's like just being open to things.
Yep. Absolutely. And again, I'm super biased, right? Because I'm an EMDR therapist. And so that's the big tool that I use. And I've seen some really fantastic things happen for people to, like I said, move through it. Which doesn't mean that the divorce or separation was okay. It doesn't mean any of those things that happened were okay, but they're not stuck in it. And so I have people who first started seeing me and a text message from their ex would just disravel them, right? They'd be so upset. They couldn't work for a few hours. To the end of our work together, they get text messages and it does absolutely nothing for them. They see it. They're not connected with it anymore. It doesn't elicit that big somatic response. And so that's one of the biggest things is like the triggers in the now. And then also related to that, I've worked with clients who, with divorce, sometimes there's this way in which it doesn't get finalized because we're doing this back and forth around the demands on each side. Right. And so what I've also seen happen is people who had a few things that were so important and they couldn't get the divorce finalized until these things happened. Once they moved through it, they were like, you know what, I don't need those anymore. It's actually more important to be done with this process now. And so those are two of the biggest things I've seen happen when someone's able to move through, all the stickiness that can get us stuck in this.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about EMDR and sort of the way it works in the area of trauma. So that people really understand it. I know you have a good way of saying it.
Yeah. And so, I referenced it a little bit in the beginning, but when we have these experiences that weren't able to be adaptively stored, and they get maladaptively stored, which means that all the different pieces of the memory kind of get stuck and frozen. Like the look on the person's face, this negative thought about myself, I'm not good enough. the sadness or the fear, right? All those pieces get stuck. And so when we think about a past experience, our brain and body gets triggered, and all those things feel like they're super present. And
Mm,
so with this therapy, we actually go through and we look at what's happening now for you. What are all the triggers that are occurring? And then we trace those back to your different experiences. So often it starts with very specific experiences related to the relationship and the separation or the divorce. And it might go back earlier to maybe some challenging times in the relationship when they were still together. And then very often goes back to maybe things in teenage years, elementary school, right? And so we make this list of the memories, and then we go through them and we reprocess them. And that's the part where people are always like, wait, what is that? And so
right.
to reprocess it is that we have the person think about the memory with a few components of it, like those components I mentioned, that negative thought about myself, an image, the feelings. And then we apply a type of bilateral stimulation. That's a back and forth like this. And it's really cool. We do multiple sets of this over a few sessions, and suddenly that memory that was super distressing, maybe a 9 out of a 0 to 10, over a few sessions of this is now a 0. I can think about it and I'm not having any intense reaction.
Mhm.
It's pretty cool. And so you go through all the memories and you clear all them, and then you work on the triggers. And then the last piece is you actually think about future triggering situations and you create a response, and you actually visualize how to respond to these future triggers.
Right, right. So there's that thing again, what you just said was that the preventative piece is
Yes,
in there. So you
absolutely.
remind yourself, the container, I don't believe that thought about myself. I am surviving outside of this
Yes,
relationship. Those kinds of things that come in as the
absolutely.
reminders of that you've processed the trauma. You don't have to revisit it in
Yep.
any new scenario.
Yep. It can be something that happened in the past and it's filed away, it's done with.
Right, like the text, like you don't have to go back to
Yes,
all of those things. It's not as right.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. I mean, I think that's the gift of doing more than talk therapy, right?
Yeah.
Because it moves the experiences out of your body.
Yeah. Yep. It
Mhm,
really helps those memories.
mhm.
And the fancy word we say is they link to adaptive memories, and that whole memory becomes transmuted, meaning all those components I talked about aren't there anymore. And there'll be people who say there's this one image related to a memory 20 years ago that's been stuck with me my whole life. And the image is just gone. It is not there anymore.
Right.
And then all those intense, emotions I had around it, they're not there. I actually feel at peace about it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is amazing. An amazing process that you can go through. And so that's the other thing to think about is people that are listening to this is that there's lots of different techniques that you can use to try to give yourself
Absolutely.
more skill set to get through this time. Mhm.
Yep, there's lots of hope around it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to say before we end our call for today? Because I know that you have so much experience in this area. I just want to make sure I've gotten all the gems from you today.
No, I think we covered, most of them. I just, want to leave on that hope piece that like there are lots of ways that things can get better, and to know that the stuckness is temporary and that you will move through it, and that everyone moves through it differently. So just because, your best friend, Abby, moved through it much faster, right? It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. Everyone gets to go through the process at their own pace, and that's okay.
Right. Good. Well, this is great. And of
Yeah.
course, people who listen to this interview will have your links and all your information if they want to reach out to you. And just thank you so much for just being a person that continues to like develop your skill set to help people. It's just such a gift to have a practitioner like you out there. So thanks for all that.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Susan. It's really great talking with you.
Yeah, really good talking to you too. Okay, well, thanks so much, and I'm sure that we'll be talking again
Okay.
soon. Okay. It's always great to have experts to respond to questions that my clients have. And I loved how my meeting with Summer Howard was a different angle than Holly Foreman's, but I really loved it because it was a very practical approach to how to deal with things like there's a lot of change, right? And in this first time, or this first stage of divorce or separation, there's tons of change. It's almost like overwhelming and head spinning, but that's a part of a transition. And there'll be a year of the first, right? The first that you do everything. So part of it is not to make yourself really, really upset with how you might be feeling during these times. It's like how to best take care of yourself during these times. So make sure, if holidays are important to you, that you have something planned on the holiday, even if it's a long walk with friends. Maybe it's not the same way you celebrate holidays, but that you're actually giving yourself permission to talk about, almost have that self-talk, like, what can I handle? What kinds of change can I handle? And how can I actually support myself in all these changes? How will I show up? I absolutely love this line, and I talked about it all week with my clients, is that the new place to be after all this change is that thought of the seat of power. And you might have been sharing that seat of power in your relationship in all different ways. But the seat of power now, it lies within you and your own life. And that this is a time to actually learn to trust yourself with your own life. A lot of times people go into flipping into, but I had a life that I shared with someone, that I invested so much that I actually gave my life to them. Okay, so I want to think about that for a second, because that's not being right here, right now. That's being in the grief of the past. So you get to choose at times not to be in the grief of the past, but to be here right now with what's happening in your life right now. Now, you might not think it's so great, but it's going to get better. And part of it is giving yourself permission to deal with it little by little, like to deal with the changes little by little. So remember, start learning to trust yourself with your life. That means the decisions that you make, that means how you spend your time. That means just reminding yourself that these moments are kind of confident building moments where you take your power back. But try to remind yourself also that the cue of being in the past grief is not being in present time, is not being right here, right now. So that's your cue that you're slipping back into the past. And if you want to be here right now, that's probably a safer place to be, a more realistic place to be. And I know you might have to visit the past from time to time, but that's just your personal reminder. Hi, everyone. I have Summer Howard back here to talk to me. And one of the reasons why I invited you back on was because it wasn't that you left me with a cliffhanger, but I had this ongoing thought when I was usually after I have a podcast interview, I talk a lot about the person's ideas in my clinical practice and my groups for the whole week. There's just certain things that you said that I thought were really brilliant, needed to be said out loud again. And earlier, when we were talking today, getting on the call, we were both talking about, like, yes, it's so busy to have a clinical practice, a mediation practice, and we both are so invested in the education part of what we do. So, just educating people, and this is why we do these podcasts, and I call people back to answer another question, is because I really want to educate the people that are listening to these clips, because there's so much that you can learn that can really help you move through this process. And there was something that you said that I was like, okay, I want like 10 more ideas there for the audience here, which is to really think about, when you're not in a grief period, because when you're in a grief period, you have to contend with the grief. But when you're not in a grief period, it's a time for you to really look at what's my next chapter going to be, and am I setting myself up well for that next chapter? And I wanted kind of more thoughts about that. I'm going to just say one other thing about that before, because I want you to include this too. So many people that are in my groups, they talk about this idea of they really can't talk about people with this topic with people in their lives, because people actually just say things that make them feel better, not the person that's struggling. And there's that thing of like, you're still thinking about that. You're still getting over that. Like, it's been like 3 years, like what's going on? But there is this part, it's so hard to just start looking at, there's going to be another chapter. And how can we, like the universal we, set up in your mind how to set that up for yourself so you're going to be safe. And then also kind of visualize, like what we said, like, leap and the net will appear. But, it's so much from the leap and the net, like there's so much space in there. So I wonder how you approach that with your clients.
Oh, this is juicy. This is so juicy because that initial grief period, it's almost like the concept of change versus transition, right? It's like the change is this abrupt, kind of blunt force to your life and the grief that happens there. But then there's this elongated kind of grief period, and that's the transition of, after a few years, you will have gone through all those firsts, like the first time having your own mortgage, or the first time, looking for an apartment on your own, or the first time buying a car, the first time going to the kids back to school and seeing, your ex spouse. So I was thinking about this topic and just the idea of, first off, right off the bat, just be gentle with yourself, knowing that this next chapter is going to be like a cornucopia, like a buffet of incredible experiences and things, but you're not going to eat it all at once. You're not going to consume it all at once. You needed time to get through it. You have to know that it's going to take time. Something that came to my mind was, I've heard Wayne Dyer, he's now passed, but Wayne Dyer, I saw him speak once, and he said, you can't rush a tulip shoot, and that's what we are. We are after divorce, we're like these little plants that are coming to life again with a new set of nutrients, a new way of being in the world. It isn't like it was before. We are new, and you cannot rush that process. And so being gentle with yourself. And in that way, for me personally, and this is what I also extend to my clients, because I've had to go through this transition twice. And it was journaling affirmations that really helped me out. This is like the practical stuff, right? In general, let's be kind to ourselves. Let's know that it's going to take some space. But journaling these two ideas in particular, because I was rewiring my brain about how I thought, about how I had to go and rush through life and like get it perfect right out of the gate. And that's just not what this experience has, right? It's still kind of ups and downs as we get out of that first like 3 years, really. That's what I've seen anyway. 3 to 5 years of,
I like that thought of the change versus transition. Like the changes in the cornucopia, there are first, like the first time you ate that thing, the first time you saw those colors. So there is this, like, just be prepared and predict, like, oh yeah, I'm walking into a first. Oh, I'm exhausted because I just had my first experience, like going to a party by myself or whatever it might be, doing something difficult, like taking some more reins financially. So there is that change. So the change is in itself one of the steps, right? And then the grief might be there. And then the grief is something to really keep reminding yourself of your compassion. Like, yeah, this is not easy. This is not easy stuff. Not everybody understands it. People, when you walk in, aren't even going to be thinking at the level of change that you're experiencing. They're not even going to be aware of it. So compassion with like, almost like, how much can you handle? How much can you handle of the cornucopia? Maybe you're just going to take a look at it and then just, walk over and sit down and have a glass of water. Maybe that's all.
Exactly. Actually participating in it. Right. Agreed.
And the transition is more of the process. Like, okay, I've done all of these first. Now I'm not doing the first anymore. So I'm actually really on the edge of transition now. I'm getting used to this.
Getting used to it. Some things that helped me, just these ideas formulate for me to get to remember that the seat of power rests within me, is I journaled, and it was just like it was almost like writing it until I believed it was true, which was I trust myself with my own life. I trust myself with my own life. That has been just very powerful for me in particular. I know that it's helped a lot of others as well, because we may have even come from our family of origin, just enmeshed and like looking to others to like solve problems for us or with us, always looking for partnership to have a self-identity. And this really is an opportunity to say, "Ooh, wow, here I am, and I trust me with my life."
Yeah, I like those three thoughts. You said this before, the seat of power. And I like that concept a lot. And I think that people need to think about like in what areas the seat of power was in their relationships, like what area they had it, what area their partners had it, whether it was the domestic area, the kid area, the financial area, or even the social area. Like sometimes people have the seat of power socially.
Yes.
And then that whole idea of like trusting yourself to trusting yourself. How did you say this? I trust myself with my own life.
With my own life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And noticing like maybe there was parts of the way that you did relationships in the past was you actually really identified yourself with another person. You were really like entangled with like a group of friends or your family that like really helped you identify like, oh, I'm doing life with these people. So now it's like really trusting yourself with your own life, making decisions about your own life. So it's such a shift, right?
Exactly. It is a shift. It is a shift. And I don't know. I mean, you could be at any stage of relationship, but it's, particularly for those that like coupled early on, in the 20s when you were kind of coming up with your own identity.
Yeah.
It's a shift. It really is. And you can even bypass this period by coupling up with a different person, someone that looks compatible, and then going on and stuff. But this is the real work. This stuff is here for you always to come back to, because this is the real work of feeling that, we've been in a coaching program before, you and I, Susan, where there was a lot of talk of sovereignty, and that is that seat of power that I'm discussing right now, which is I have sovereignty over my actions. I have the power to react however I choose to the situation. And though I think that concept is what will carry people through that period of transition, when you've gone through that immediate change and you're in this kind of like unfolding those 3 years and focusing on, what do I want my life to look like now? Right? Because that was a part of the setup for this extended interview, which is how do you do that after a loss, such a change? And it's cool to have a new way of thinking about your life that really is, what do I want to create? Because that it rests right here, right with me.
Right. So people who are listening to this, we know that it's not so simple as, okay, my next chapter is going to have all these things in it that I want. We know that there's a process that you're going to be going through, that you're going to be coming in and out, back and forth, trying to figure out who you are, what you want, do your best thinking in the mediation, financial part of your separation, so that you feel like you have some kind of understanding about how you're moving forward in that sort of safety financial way, if that was a seat of power that you did not have in your marriage. And then to really keep envisioning, like, what do you want? And we know it's going to take some time to figure it out, and keep circling back to self, like trusting yourself that you're going to be making the best decisions for you, not for 3 other people, but for you. Right.
And that is, there's so many different decisions that are happening during that transition after divorce. That is that's
name
why
like 5 of them. What do you feel like the top 5 that you hear people talking about?
So housing is one.
Yeah.
Your income is the other. And I would say those are the two really big ones. And then of course, co-parenting and dealing
Yeah.
with the decisions about your children on a week-to-week basis when you're co-parenting school-age children. I would say those are the main. And then, how do I start dating again? How do I open my heart up to other people
Right.
after?
What's my social life looking like now?
And what does your social life look like? Exactly.
Mhm.
What do you like to do?
Right.
And then parents are in that weird spot where it's like, well, it was all about the kids. And then I have this free time now, if you're on a 50-50 schedule, which many of us are. What do I do? Who am I? How do I get off the couch and not feel sorry for myself about this? And there is that period. I'm just acknowledging there's a period of the couch sitting.
Mhm.
And then there's an awakening that happens. And she's like, I can get out there and I can start doing something different, maybe rekindling old things that I love to do. That's usually where I start, and
Right.
where my clients start is just look back before the relationship. What things did you love to do?
Yeah. And sometimes I think if people are really struggling with the getting off the couch part, that is an indicator that you really need a little bit more support.
Agreed.
Because there can be this period of time where depression really is like a kicking in, and you need to figure out how to or negativity, like, sometimes you've been in a
Exactly.
negative relationship for a really long time.
Totally.
So it's hard to drop the negativity part and actually feel like I want to be with other people, or I even get a sense that people might want to be with me. It's that negativity part needs to shift also, to remember that who you are, that you aren't the negative part of your relationship anymore. Like if that felt like where your identity was for a while, really giving yourself time to shift and get support if you cannot get off the couch.
Exactly. The choices that you're making about income, and it even applies if you have a full-time job, a professional job, because you still have to maintain that job while you're divorcing. That is no small feat. And then there is the situation where you may have been underemployed and need to get a job or a new career. And again, in those choices, what do I want? Maybe you don't want to go back to work full time. That's maybe out of your control. You have to do that, but your choice lies in maybe not the schedule, right? But the choice lies in, what are you going to do for that? How are you going to contribute your talents and time?
Right. And maybe that's what switches. A lot of things switch, like housing, the way you make money, the way you spend your time, the way you socialize, the way you parent. So there's a lot of shifts, a lot of changes. And then the integration of it is the transition, right? That you start developing your way to do it. Yeah.
And there's a feeling of having ground beneath your feet. There is. You'll feel it. It does come. But just to acknowledge, be kind to yourself, and then also know that you have the power a lot of times in how you approach this transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for giving us those tips. I felt like there was still that part of that struggle that I see my clients go to, is like how to get to that next chapter, because it feels sometimes so far away, or they have to accomplish so much to feel like they get to it,
Totally.
Like,
and you have to get it perfect
chapter?
right out of the bat or something. And that's
Right.
not the way it goes.
Right. So the next chapter really is building up back yourself, and then having your next chapter of the practice of how you want your life to be. And you might be practicing for a little bit because it needs to be like readjusted or tweaked here and there, or
Exactly.
re-experienced.
Exactly.
So, good. Well, I'm really glad that we got another chance to talk just about that little piece. And I
Thank you,
hope that
Susan.
helps people listening. I hope it really gives you some more clues on being kind to yourself, some of the concepts of which we covered today. And keep listening. There'll be more little clips like this to give you some boosts of energy along the way. So thanks always for being part of it. Okay. Bye, Summer. Take good care.
Thanks, Susan.
one of the things that I really wanted both of these folks to address is a question that I get a lot in my groups, which is, how come I'm stuck? How come I'm not healing? How come this is taking so long? And so I really loved talking with Holly about her expertise in trauma and talking about that divorce is a type of trauma, and that we really need to work with ourselves and cajole ourselves to get through this period. And oftentimes it takes a long time to get through this period because the trauma of divorce also represents the other losses and the other traumas and griefs that we've had in our childhood, and the way that we attach to our caretakers, and the kind of way that we move on, sort of those models of how we move on and how we recreate our lives. Sometimes as kids, we didn't get those. Maybe we had models of relationships that just stayed together, even if they were unhealthy. And maybe also we had so many losses that clinging or not being abandoned was much more important than being in a relationship that wasn't working. So she gives some really good indicators about how to understand when you're in the state of trauma, when you're in a trauma place. And that place typically is a chronic reoccurring pattern or thought pattern that you have in your mind. Possibly you can't hear anything that other people are saying, you're flooded. Most likely you're withdrawn and probably ruminating about something that's not very healthy. Those are some of the signs. So if you're going through a hard time or a loss of some sort, you might want to just touch base with yourself and see how far away from being present you are at times. And what is that about? What is that feeling of being in a trauma state like for you, a foggy state? So that's a place to work. So a lot of times we would hope that we would be able to work through those states ourselves. But as Holly says to us, it's not feelings, it's the body that you need to work with. The body is holding the feelings, it's remembering the feelings from a long time ago. So we need to help the body release the feelings just as much as we need to understand where the feelings are in our body. She also speaks about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. And when we're in the parasympathetic nervous system, like maybe how you are listening to my voice right now, that you're calm, that you're listening, that you're very aware of what I'm saying. And that when you're in the sympathetic nervous system, you might be daydreaming or actually thinking about something else and not being very present. And typically the sympathetic nervous system is a signal that our body is in survival mode. It feels like it is in danger. And a lot of times when we're in a situation like the trauma of a separation, when our world is really shifting, where we have to let go of our primary attachment figure, because many people transfer the parental attachment onto their primary attachment relationship, that we feel like we are in danger, we are in survival. And when we have interaction with that person, we will get re-triggered by that sense of that we're in danger and we're in survival. So it's really important to have tools to use when you're having these experiences. One of the tools that I love that Holly gave was this whole idea about the breath, like just breathing 5 times, and really 5, not less than that, settles the nervous system. And we actually have to get into a practice of settling our nervous system when our nervous system is upset. And that takes 5 breaths. So experiment and breathe 3 times, and you will notice that you're still unsettled. So breathe the full 5 breaths and see that your body finally relaxes, and you might even let out a little bit of a sigh. So her thought is that we don't just like automatically like get settled and calm down. We actually have to work on recreating that state for ourselves so that we can know what that state feels like and know when we're not in that state. And that's the trick. The other thing that she talked about, which I thought was really, really important, and it is the thought of having a container that you get to decide what you bring with you in terms of being in any situation that you're in. So a lot of times when we're going through a separation and divorce, we have to interface with our partner. We have to interface with memories and things that might be uncomfortable for us. So we actually need to really thin it out. Like we have to make sure that we're not complicating these interactions too much because they're hard to do and to not be triggered in. So the thought is, in your mind's eye, can you create a container and say all these things that I'm thinking I don't need to think right now when I'm just having to answer the text from my ex, or when I'm picking up my kids from my ex, I don't have to think about all the hurts that I had in the marriage. I don't have to do that right at this moment. I'm going to just practice being as present as I can be when my kids come into the car. The other thought is, if you're not a perfect person or a perfect parent because you are triggered, because you are very emotional at this time, you can explain that to people. You can tell people that you're not really being very rational, but you're working on it. And there's always that room for the pause, right? That you don't have to keep talking if you're noticing your voice is really fast, or you're not really making sense, or you're having like a very anxious conversation, which can happen, right? Like we might be feeling a lot of sadness and then blah, 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 we're talking like crazy, giving people all this information we don't want to give them, but we're not grounded, we're not settled. So we're just kind of doing whatever our fast racing mind wants to do. So there's no problem at all with stopping and just saying, I need a minute to answer that question, to see what I want to talk about next, to just be getting used to being here. And I love that. I also love the idea about not pushing yourself so much. This thought about like sometimes we just push ourselves into situations, and even if we have a nice container, it's just too triggering. So to know when to back off and when to just take care of yourself. We can also use this container model for our kids. Like you can tell them that we're working on trying not to be so activated around them, and that we're trying to slow down, and we can actually help them use it too. So if you're having like a family gathering, and it's a really emotional one because maybe that's the first time that you're with them on your own during a holiday, that you can talk ahead of time about what you want to put in the container and practice not dealing with that part too, but just actually trying to be more present in what's going on in life right now. So these are just great ideas. And there's the thought of like the success stories is actually just doing some regular work on yourself and getting regular support and tuning into yourself constantly. So I think that the whole idea about how to deal with your trauma when you're going through a divorce and what it signifies to you, that was from your past that you're still working on and working out, and that's coming up in this time. Whatever it is, know that if you need more support, I offer a lot of groups that really help people feel connected with each other. And so if you want to read more about that on my website, I'd really welcome you to also just ask me any questions if you have them.